Welcome to our latest Wandering Walks of Wonder History Walking Tour. Today we're visiting Levvenworth, Kansas. On this walk we'll learn about the events and history that have made Leavenworth such a historic place. Our walk begins at its founding here along the Missouri River. Welcome to historic Leavenworth, the oldest city in Kansas. Present-day Kansas was part of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. After the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which provided for the transport of the eastern Indian tribes west of the Mississippi, the territory today known as Kansas was allotted in portions to various nations of Native Americans, including the Wyandot, Shawnee, Delaware, Potawatomi, Osage, Miami, and others from the east of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. 24 years later, on May 30th, 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act became law and the territory of Kansas was opened to white settlement. The first town association was formed on June 9th, 1854. Town lots were sold on October 9th of that year, and by New Year's Day, 1855, Leavenworth boasted 200 inhabitants. The population boomed. By August of 1856, there were 1,200 citizens, and by 1859, just 3 years later, there were over 5,000, and just a few years later, the population jumped to 10,000. Today, the present population is a little over 39,000. In 1854, the Missouri River was the freeway of commerce. This landing was the heart of Old Leavenworth. The natural landscape, transportation, and business combined to make Leavenworth the largest and most important city on the early Western Plains. Passengers and supplies stopped here because of the excellent overland connections that were available. It was the jumping-off point for overland travel to the vast western areas of the United States. In 1865, over 400 boats landed here, from which one firm alone hauled off over 50,000 tons of supplies. The levee was a natural site for commerce and home to many business pioneers. The first doctor's office in Kansas was near here, as were the first newspaper, first merchant, and the first manufacturer. By 1870, there were over 106 manufacturers located in Leavenworth, many clustered in this area that we're walking through today. The railroad era began in the eastern part of the United States in the 1830s when the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad opened with 13 miles of track. Most of the lines that were built in the northeast and old northwest areas of the country. The first Kansas territorial legislature chartered 5 railroad companies in 1855. 2 were the Leavenworth and Compton and the Leavenworth, Pawnee, and Western Railroads. Several roads were built in the 1860s and 1870s. The Missouri River Railroad was built from Wyandotte north through Leavenworth to join the Missouri Pacific at the Nebraska border. This line later became part of the Missouri Pacific System. James McGonigal, a distinguished local architect and laborer, was awarded to build Union Depot, which we're walking past here today, and it was built in 1888. It was an early hope that Leavenworth would serve as a center for collection and distribution of goods, and that major lines would make Leavenworth a transportation hub for the nation. But unfortunately, those hopes were not realized. Probably the most important reason that Leavenworth did not become a major rail hub was the lack of a bridge across the Missouri River. Kansas City, just a short distance south of here, won the race by completing the Hannibal and St. Joseph Bridge that connected Missouri and Kansas near the confluence of the Missouri and Kaw rivers. Kansas City thus became the terminus of major railroads and branch lines that served Leavenworth. Leavenworth has had a number of historic and famous people who have lived in town, and we'll see many of those as we go along the walk. But one of those right now that we'll talk about is William Tecumseh Sherman. The law firm of Sherman, Ewing, and McCook once stood on the second floor of a wooden building just in front of us. All four partners in the firm became general officers in the Union Army during the Civil War. The most famous member of the firm was William Tecumseh Sherman, who led Union forces on the famous March to the Sea. Sherman, a West Point graduate, served 13 years in the U.S. Army before resigning his commission to become a banker in California. The bank business failed, and he lost most of his money in paying off the bank debts. In 1858, at the suggestion of his father-in-law, Sherman came to Leavenworth to join the law firm of his brother-in-laws Thomas and Hugh Ewing. Though not a lawyer, he was to handle the non-legal affairs of the firm, while the brother-in-laws handled the courtroom part of the business. Sherman decided that since his name was part of the law firm, he should get a license as a lawyer, although he had not studied law. In the summer of 1859, Sherman left Leavenworth to take the job as the head of a new military academy in Louisiana, and later rejoined the Army, becoming a general in 1861 and one of the most outstanding Union field commanders of the Civil War. Leavenworth was the gateway to the West and headquarters of the Department of Missouri, which was the supply base for settlers and immigrants to the vast region lying west to the Pacific Ocean. Selected because of the excellence of its site, the navigability of the Missouri River, and the protection offered by the military station at the nearby fort, merchandise and commodities of every type and description arrived by boat from the east and were deposited at the landing along the river. Upon receipt, goods were loaded on wagons and later on railroads moving westward or transferred to nearby retail and wholesale business locations for storage and sale. By 1870, Leavenworth was a population of over 25,000 people. It was the largest city between St. Louis and the Pacific Ocean, and a major commercial center with a paved levee at the riverbank. It also had miles of graded and macadamized streets and long rows of 3- and 4-story brick and iron buildings, many of them that we see as we walk along here along Cherokee, Shawnee, and Delaware streets. A diverse group of men and women, both native and foreign-born, some acting on their own behalf and others as agents of Eastern business houses, arrived at the Leavenworth landing, attracted by the opportunities presented by the commercial activity. Prominent among the entrepreneurs settling here, dedicated to making Leavenworth the most important business community west of St. Louis, were many Jewish merchants, mostly well-educated immigrants from Central Europe, including Germany, Austria, and Hungary. While men of different ethnic backgrounds engaged in various occupations and profession, the Jews of Leavenworth predominated in selling clothing and dry goods ordered ready-made from Eastern establishments or tailored in Leavenworth from bolts of fabric. Many were quite successful, playing important roles in the growth and development of Leavenworth, and also serving in numerous public and charitable positions. Before you stands the Manufacturers Bank Building, which was once headquarters for the freighting firm of Russell Majors and Wadell. Fort Leavenworth's strategic location made it the logical logistical supply center to support the U.S. Army throughout the West, but the Army did not have the capability to transport the volume of supplies needed. So in 1855, the Army awarded a 2-year contract to William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Wadell, the most experienced freighters of that time. The partnership hired 1,700 men as teamsters and purchased 7,500 head of oxen and 500 wagons. They established a field headquarters in the small infant town of Leavenworth, along with a blacksmith shop, wagon repair shop, lumber yard, meat processing plant, and grocery store. Discovery of gold in the Pikes Peak region of Colorado in 1858 started a flow of eager gold seekers to the area and encouraged Russells, Majors, and Wadell to start a stage line between Leavenworth and the Colorado goldfields. Each stagecoach was pulled by 4 mules and carried 6 passengers. The trip took about 10 days to travel from Leavenworth to the Denver area. The passenger fare was $125 with the baggage allowance of just about 25 pounds. In 1860, the firm established the Pony Express to provide weekly mail service between St. Joseph, Missouri and Sacramento, California. Buffalo Bill Cody, who as a 12-year-old boy had tended the oxen for the wagon trains, was one of the 120 riders for the Pony Express. In its 18 months of operation, the riders made about 310 runs in each direction and carried over 35,000 pieces of mail. Near this spot in 1857, Leavenworth's Stockton Hall was built. Although not the first of the town's public halls, it did become one of the most famous. In the summer of 1858, a meeting was held at Stockton Hall which gave birth to the Democratic Party here in Kansas. Prominent Democrats of the Kansas Territory and old-line Whigs with similar political views adopted a platform which became the foundation for the Democratic Party here. In December of 1859, Stockton Hall was filled to capacity to welcome a visitor from Illinois. Citizens of Leavenworth were eager to hear the man who had debated Stephen Douglas. Those debates cast Abraham Lincoln into the national spotlight, and Lincoln was making a speaking tour of towns in the Kansas Territory. On the night of December 3rd, 1859, Lincoln took the stage in Stockton Hall and spoke at length on popular sovereignty and the principles of the Republic's founding fathers. Lincoln spoke of the likelihood of statehood for the Kansas Territory and the need to maintain a position opposing slavery. Exactly 4 months to the month after Lincoln's Stockton Hall address, a touring theatrical group also appeared on that same stage. One of the actors was John Wilkes Booth, whom the New York newspaper said was the country's most triumphant actor. Barely 16 months later, Booth went to Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., where he assassinated President Lincoln. Near this spot once stood the most famous and magnificent hotel between St. Louis and San Francisco, the Planters Hotel. The Planters was a beautiful 4-story building with 100 guest rooms that opened in 1856. Abraham Lincoln visited Leavenworth from the 3rd to the 7th of December 1859. He was not yet president and he didn't have the beard he usually is pictured with, but he was an important man, here to do some important things. Lincoln had just bested Stephen Douglas in the famous debates. He was a national figure considered by some as a possible vice president. He had been invited to speak at a Republican Party national convention and wanted to try out some ideas for the speech on the people here in Leavenworth. He did make brief stops elsewhere in northwest Kansas that were well received, but rather sparsely attended. Leavenworth, however, had prepared a grand reception. Lincoln was met by a huge parade of horsemen, carriages, a band, and the party faithful. On the night of December 3rd, Lincoln spoke at Leavenworth's famous Stockton Hall. Although the weather was bitterly cold, the hall was filled to overflowing. Lincoln reviewed the history of federal policy towards slavery in the United States. He said the Republican Party sought to maintain that historic policy, not interfering with slavery in the South, but prohibiting its extension into new territories. He urged his listeners not to use violence as John Brown had done, but to triumph through the ballot box. His speech was well received and many wanted to hear it, so he was persuaded to speak again on the next night on December the 5th, here on the steps of the Planters Hotel. About 1,500 people stood out in the cold weather while he gave his speech again. Many legends have sprung up around Lincoln's visit to Leavenworth. He is said to have requested to sample Leavenworth's beer during the visit. Later, local brewers advertised their brand as the one that gave Lincoln the strength to write his famous speeches. A local brothel was supposed to have been closed just to make a better impression on the visiting dignitary. A Leavenworth preacher, previously timid on the subject of slavery, was said to have been so transformed after hosting Lincoln in his parsonage that pro-slaverers ran him out of town. Lincoln stayed in the Planters Hotel and visited with friends for about 5 days. Isaac and Mary Cody and family arrived in the Leavenworth area in June of 1854 and built a 7-room log cabin in Salt Creek Valley just north of Fort Leavenworth. Bill was 9 years old and the only son in a family of girls. Immediately upon arrival here, Isaac secured an army contract to supply hay to the fort. 13 weeks after his arrival, Isaac, an outspoken opponent to the spread of slavery, got into a heated argument with a pro-slavery neighbor and received a serious knife wound. Isaac never fully recovered, but this didn't prevent him from becoming active in Free Soil Kansas politics. In March of 1857, Isaac died, leaving Bill at the young age of 11, the only man in the family. Mary Cody took in roomers, and Bill got a job driving a team of oxen to town at 50 cents a day. His next job at age 12 was the Overland Freight Company of Russell's, Majors, and Wadell, running messages for their office. This was too dull, and he switched over to becoming a herdsman for the company's large herd of oxen. About this time, he got into a fight with a much larger boy. Getting the worst of it, he drew a knife and slashed the other fellow. To avoid arrest, he hid out in a wagon train. The wagon master, a friend, persuaded his mother to let him hire him on as a drover for the train's extra oxen. They were hauling military freight to Fort Kearny and would be gone about 40 days. She agreed, and so at the age of 12, Bill began the first of his many adventures. Other wagon train expeditions followed, and then he switched over to the company's Pony Express. At 15 years of age, William Cody was employed as a Pony Express rider and given a short 45-mile run from Julesburg to the west. After some months, he was transferred to Slade's division in Wyoming, where he made the longest nonstop ride from Red Butte Station to Rocky Ridge Station and back when he found that his relief had been killed. The distance of 322 miles over one of the most dangerous portions of the entire trail was completed in just 21 hours. Between 1854 and 1861, this part of Kansas, in fact, most of the territory of Kansas at that time, was involved in brutal attacks against people who were pro-slavery and those who were anti-slavery. During this time, this era was known as Bleeding Kansas because of all the skirmishes and violence that was occurring. Elections were held to elect a territory legislature, and in many places, Missourians and other Southerners seized the polls and crammed the ballots, and in other places, free soldiers did the same. The result was that two legislatures were elected in the territory of Kansas. The pro-slavery one making its capital at Lecompton, not too far away from here, and the Free Staters making one in Topeka. The rival parties met at the polls and elsewhere, and many lives were lost in the fights that took place. And all the many lives that were lost in the miserable border fighting were lost in small affairs between scouting parties and outposts. Individual accounts of violence, including the fatal shooting of pro-slavery orator William Malcolm Clark at a public meeting in Leavenworth in 1855 by Free Soiler Cole McRae. McRae was indicted but never prosecuted for the murder. Another incident, and one of the most outrageous and disgraceful, happened to William Phillips. It was believed Phillips had given McRae the weapon to kill Clark. On May 17th, Phillips was arrested and told to leave the territory or he would be tarred and feathered. When Phillips did not leave, he was abducted and taken to Weston, Missouri, just across the river, and was stripped to the waist, tarred and feathered, and ridden out of town on a rail. Phillips was then marched through town and placed on a block to be auctioned off by a slave in a mock slave sale. Leavenworth, Kansas has many unsung heroes from African American history here in the town. There have been many distinguished ladies and gentlemen who have made significant contributions to military, education, civil rights, and community service. One of those is Mr. Blanche Bruce, who is known for having tutored about 1,800 young men for entrance to the military service academies, with only 3 failing to qualify. He was the first black graduate of the University of Kansas and was principal of Sumner Elementary School here in Leavenworth for 54 years. Mr. Richard Warren served as a teacher and principal in two schools and taught many generations of Leavenworth citizens, gaining the love and respect of the entire community. Mr. Warren retired from the Leavenworth School District system after 34 years, but continued to serve as a substitute teacher whenever called upon. Mr. Earl M. Lawson served the Leavenworth school system for over 35 years. As principal of Lincoln School, he often told his graduating students, "Let your decorum rise to the dignity of the occasion." Mr. Lawson was known as an early civil rights leader who in 1925 refused to take a back seat on a Leavenworth bus. Mr. Donald Hollowell graduated from Leavenworth High School and became a distinguished civil rights lawyer in Atlanta, Georgia, defending many civil rights cases, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Mr. Benjamin Day served 31 years in the Leavenworth school system as teacher and principal. Mr. Day served on the city council and in 1972 was to be the first black mayor of Leavenworth and serving 3 consecutive terms. There are also some famous African American churches in town, some of those still in existence. One of those was Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was established by people who had escaped the savage chains of slavery. At night, a light from the church could be seen from the eastern banks of the Missouri River, planting hope for freedom in the hearts of those still enslaved in that state. This light guided many slaves to refuge and safety in the state of Kansas. The basement of the church was a depot on the Underground Railroad and housed and fed many escaping slaves. When you mention Leavenworth, people often think of the federal prison that's here in town, and now's a good time to talk about it. Unfortunately, I can't film in front of the building because there are signs that say it's a federal offense to film a penitentiary, but we can talk about it. The United States Penitentiary here in Leavenworth is the oldest federal correctional facility to continuously house inmates. On July 1st, 1895, inmates were received by the penitentiary at its original sites, which is now the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks on Fort Leavenworth. Beginning in March of 1897, inmates marched 7 miles round trip daily to the site of the present institution to construct this facility. So prison labor made the new prison at that time. Construction continued until 1903 when the first 418 inmates were incarcerated there. The prison is a self-contained unit with a 35-foot wall that extends 30 feet underground and encircles about 16 acres. Outside the walls were a sawmill, a rock quarry, and a brick plant that supplied all necessary building materials. The prison operated a farm that included hogs, cows, some crops, and pasture land, and an additional 942 acres were purchased across the Missouri River in 1923. The clearing of this land provided wood for the ovens in the bakery and kitchen. By 1935, the wood supply was depleted, requiring a new set of gas ovens. Inside the walls of the prison are a power plant, hospital, school, and industries where inmates can learn a trade. These industries include a brush and broom factory, printing plant, textile factory, and furniture factory where the late President John F. Kennedy's famous maple rocking chair was made. Some of the more well-known inmates to be housed at the federal prison were Robert F. Stroud, better known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, and post-prohibition gangster Gaston Means, Joe Barker, Harvey Bailey, Machine Gun Kelly, Frank Nitti, George Bugs Marone, and Nick Arnstein. These were all people of during the times when prohibition and the gangsters were active. Educational services available to inmates include religion, high school, as well as college courses. Talented inmates present musicals inside the prison, but not for the public. Recreation events include movies and sports such as baseball, basketball, and handball. Fire, riots, and killings have taken place throughout the years. As a result of a reorganization of the entire federal prison system in 1930, no guns are carried inside the walls. If an inmate dies and no one claims the body, it is buried in the Peckenwood Cemetery, which is just west of the penitentiary.
No, come here, Maggie.
Whoop. Hi, puppy. Don't want to step on you.
She's a little attached.
As we walk back through the downtown area and take a look at some of these buildings that originally housed many dozens of bars, it's a perfect time to talk about Cyclone Carrie, or Carrie Nation. Carrie Amelia Nation, the Kansas prohibitionist who became internationally known for breaking up saloons, was born in Kentucky in 1846. She was a widow of an alcoholic. She remarried and settled in Medicine Lodge, Kansas. The state constitution prohibited the open saloon, but many Kansas towns had them, including Leavenworth. Mrs. Nation launched a one-woman campaign against alcoholic spirits, often carrying a hatchet and a Bible. She prayed for fallen souls and left hatchet marks on many bars in town. Her first bid for national fame came in 1900 when she demolished the Carrie Hotel Bar in Wichita and destroyed all its liquor. Most of her saloon smashing was done in Kansas, although she did make a number of trips out of state. Mrs. Carey was arrested 30 times. She published temperance magazines and lectured and sold miniature hatchets to finance her war on alcohol. Carrie Nation visited Leavenworth in March of 1901, but without her hatchet. She did no damage while in Leavenworth. Fernando Milla, proprietor of the National Hotel that once stood at 14th in Cherokee, arranged for a police escort and stayed with her as she visited several locations in town and took a streetcar to the soldier's home. The word had spread of her impending visits and the bars were closed. After Mr. Milla escorted her to her room on the second floor of the National Hotel, the saloon on the first floor was opened and did a brisk business, largely because of the many people who had turned out to see Cyclone Carrie, as she was called by the newspapers. She didn't return to Leavenworth until January of 1911 when, in ill health, she was brought by a nephew to the Evergreen Sanitarium. She died there 5 months later in June of that year of 1911 and is buried in Belton, Missouri. Called saintly by some and crazy by many, Carrie Nation was at one time the most talked about woman in the world. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Leavenworth was the most important manufacturing city in Kansas and one of the largest in the United States. It had 67 prosperous and growing industries. It was third in furniture production in the United States, had the second largest mill machinery plant in the country, second in the manufacturing of stoves, had a large washing machine manufacturing company, had the largest manufacturer of amusement rides, and produced over 25,000 tons of coal within the city limits. Leavenworth's coal mines were an important industry in the late 1800s. Many stoves made in Leavenworth radiated warmth from the soft coal that was found hundreds of feet beneath the city. On October 20th, 1869, a vein of coal approximately 2 feet thick was found at a depth of about 700 or 800 feet down. A second, thicker vein was discovered at approximately 1,000 feet, and a third vein that was 30 inches thick was found some 100 feet further down. The discovery of coal gave rise to the industrialization of Leavenworth. Many factories that opened in town had various things that they made, including Abernathy Brothers. This company served and made an extensive line of furniture, including chairs, bedsteads, chamber pots, bureaus, and mirrors. For a time, the Abernathy brothers also produced coffins and coffin trimmings. There were also saddle companies like the Ackenhausen Saddlery Company that made saddles for horses and carriages as well. A number of flour mills were started in Leavenworth soon after the city opened. Flour milling continued well into the 20th century. One of the more famous ones was the Bay State Milling Company that came into town in 1954 and shipped bulk milled flour to commercial bakeries. Another important industry that's in town was carousels that were made by C.W. Parker. Parker in 1910 moved into a 2-story brick building on 4th Street. Unfortunately, there were a decline in these amusement ride type sales, and the building was converted into an automotive battery manufacturing company. I hope you've enjoyed this Wandering Walks of Wonder tour here throughout Leavenworth, Kansas, and also learning a little bit about the history and the people that have made Leavenworth such a historic place. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you on our next Wandering Walks of Wonder adventure. Take care now. Bye-bye.